Everyone talks about home like it's a thing you can measure in square feet, like it's just wood, nails, and paint. But for me, home was a line in the dirt. The soil my boots sank into, the sweat my father left behind when he built the fences, the sunburn I earned fixing them. That land wasn't just mine, it was my bloodline. And on the day everything started, I realized some people see that kind of legacy not as sacred, but as something they can take. Her name was Grace, the kind of woman who walked like the pavement existed just for her heels. Clipboard in hand, lips pressed so tight they could hold water. She wasn't lost, she wasn't visiting. She was here to claim something that didn't belong to her. And she'd chosen the worst possible day to try. I'd just come off a 12-hour shift working the farm. Feed bags hauled. Tractor patched together with more stubbornness than metal. Chased down a goat that had decided the neighbor's tomato patch was an all-you-can-eat buffet. My shirt was soaked, my boots still had fresh manure on them, and the only thing I wanted was a chair and a cold drink. But instead, Grace was standing at my gate like she'd been appointed queen of the land. She didn't even bother with small talk. "Mr. Bennett," she said, glancing at her papers like I was already guilty of something. I nodded. "Yep, that's me. I'm here on behalf of the Shadow Creek HOA board. We've received reports of unapproved commercial activity taking place on this property." She lifted her chin like she was about to read me my rights. "Specifically, illegal Airbnb rentals. As the president of the HOA, I'm required to investigate." I stared at her for a moment. "Ma'am, this is a working farm. Ain't nobody paying to sleep next to chickens and cow patties." If she heard me, she didn't show it. "Your property falls under the shared zoning buffer. We have rights to inspect. You may not realize, but your cabin was part of the original Shadow Creek boundary map. And that was when I knew she wasn't here for a chat. She was here for a foothold. The kind of foothold people like her never let go of." "Nope," I said simply, leaning on the post. "Not happening." Her eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to hearing no. Most folks around Shadow Creek treated her word like gospel. She scribbled something on her clipboard, a sound that felt like nails down a chalkboard, and muttered, "Refusal to cooperate will result in legal consequences." I didn't answer, just stared her down, letting the silence fill the air. The wind shifted. My dogs barked in the distance, and Grace's hand twitched like she wanted to point at something else to condemn. She started walking the fence line, snapping pictures with her phone like she was building a case file. Unpermitted structures, possible code violations, animal safety concerns. I followed her gaze. "That's a chicken coop," I said flatly. She ignored me, climbed into her shiny SUV like she was fleeing a crime scene, then rolled her window down just long enough to throw out one last threat. "Expect a full inspection. We're bringing the board." And then she peeled out, tires spitting gravel. The next day, Frank, my neighbor down the road, untexted me. "Bro, Grace is making noise at the meeting, says you're running a covered Airbnb and hiding unregistered dogs." I sent him a laughing emoji, but I knew Grace wasn't bluffing. Grace didn't do empty threats. She calculated every move. 3 days later, I had to head out of town for tractor parts. Before leaving, I locked the cabin, posted fresh private property and beware of dogs signs, and made sure Bear and Grizzle were fed and free to roam. I figured that would keep trouble at bay until I got back. I was wrong. Because what? I didn't know as I drove north. Was that Grace had been waiting for her chance? I was halfway upstate when my phone buzzed. Motion sensor alert. East Gate. Usually it's deer, sometimes a stray coyote nosing around. But when I pulled up the live feed, the air in my truck went cold. There she was, Grace, squeezing herself. Through a gap in the side fence, clipboard still clutched like it was some kind of badge. Her purple blouse stood out like a bruise against the green tree line. And she wasn't sneaking. She was marching. She ducked under the first camera like she knew it was there, like she'd done her homework, muttering to herself the whole time. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the type. She was narrating her own victory in her head. It wasn't victory she was walking into, because what Grace didn't know, what she could never imagine, was that the cameras weren't the only thing watching. Bear and Grizzle had been sprawled under the porch all morning, soaking up the shade. Farm dogs don't start trouble, but they sure know how to finish it. The second Grace's shoes crunched on the gravel path, their ears snapped up. I watched from the cab of my truck as she ignored the big red sign on the second gate. Do not enter. Live guard dogs. She didn't even slow down. Whether she thought it was an empty threat or she was just too arrogant to care, it didn't matter. Bear moved first. He's all muscle, built for speed, but silent until the last moment. Grace didn't even see him until he was 5 feet away. By then, it was too late. She shrieked, tried to backpedal, but the clipboard tangled in her arm. She stumbled, legs flailing like she was trying to swim through air, and hit the dirt. Hard. Grizzle came right behind, barking like a storm rolling over the hills. They didn't maul her. They're trained better than that. But they weren't going to welcome her with a handshake either. One bite to the leg, a scratch down her arm, fabric ripping. Enough to make her understand she didn't belong there. Enough to make her scramble like the ground was on fire. I hit the call button for 911, explaining exactly what I was watching in real time. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost bored, until I sent the footage live to their system. Then the tone shifted. Stay on the line, sir. Units are en route. Grace was already limping back toward the fence, hair wild, muttering about rabid animals and criminal behavior. She tried to point her phone at the dogs like it was some kind of weapon, but she was shaking too much to keep the camera straight. By the time I made it home, the paramedics were patching her up at the property line. The sheriff stood with his arms crossed, the kind of expression that said he'd already made up his mind. Grace saw me and instantly found her voice. He set them on me. Those animals are vicious. The sheriff didn't even glance at her. We saw everything, he said quietly to me. Everything. But I knew this wasn't over. People like Grace never walk away after losing face. They double down. And if she couldn't win on my property, she'd try to win in court. Grace didn't waste a single day. By the time the sheriff's report was filed and the county closed the incident as trespassing, she was already spinning her own version. To hear her tell it, she was a hero, a concerned citizen trying to protect community standards from a lawless neighbor. And her stage? The courtroom. I got the notice 2 weeks later. She was pressing charges for assault by canine and reckless endangerment. Her claim was that I had knowingly unleashed dangerous animals on her while she was performing her civic duties. I almost laughed. Almost. Because Grace didn't just show up to court, she made an entrance. She limped in with a crutch she didn't need, bandages on scratches that had already scabbed over, and that same cursed clipboard tucked into an oversized purse like it was Exhibit A. Her lawyer, a thin man with eyes that never seemed to land on anything, flipped through papers while she whispered in his ear like a coach calling plays. I sat there quietly, footage queued on a flash drive, in my pocket. When the judge called us forward, Grace's lawyer started in with a story so polished you'd think she'd been assaulted by wolves in the middle of the night. He painted her as a woman of integrity, volunteering her time to maintain the beauty and safety of her neighborhood. He said she was shaken and traumatized and that she still suffered nightmares. Then he asked for damages. Thousands. When it was my turn, I didn't even speak first. I just slid the footage across to the judge. We all watched it together. The bright private property signs in the frame, the red "Beware of Dogs" warning on the second gate, and Grace herself stepping over the fence like the rules didn't apply. The dogs appearing only after she ignored every posted warning. Her tripping over her own clipboard, the bite, the scratch, her scramble to get out. The room went quiet. The judge leaned back. "Ms. Parker," he said, "is your HOA aware that this property is not under their jurisdiction?" Grace froze. Her lawyer cleared his throat, trying to spin it. Your Honor, the Shadow Creek HOA operates within a shared zoning buffer. That doesn't exist, the judge cut in. This land has never been part of your HOA or any annexation zone. You had no legal authority to be there. Grace's mouth tightened. She tried to argue, but the judge was already dismissing the case. It was over in less than 10 minutes. I could have stopped there, walked away with the win and gone back to my farm like nothing happened. But when you've been targeted like that, when someone's tried to turn your own home into their playground of control, you don't just let it fade quietly. That day, I decided Grace was going to learn what boundaries really meant. The courthouse doors swung shut behind us, but I didn't head for my truck right away. Grace was still in the hallway, arguing with her lawyer like the verdict had been some freak accident instead of the obvious truth. She caught me looking, and straightened up like she was still the president of something that mattered here. I didn't say a word. I just walked past her, filing the thought away. Not for revenge, but for resolution. The next morning, I drove into town and filed a restraining order. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but when the papers landed in her hands, it would speak louder than anything I could say. Grace was now legally barred from coming within 300 feet of my property, my animals, my mailbox, my fence line, even my tractor. I wasn't done, because trespassing wasn't just about me. It was about the county's zoning laws she'd stomped over like they didn't exist. And when I handed over the footage to the zoning office, they didn't hesitate. The fine was steep. Violation of property boundaries, triggering emergency services without cause, and bypassing a legally posted guard dog warning. And the HOA? They tried to keep it quiet at first. Pretend their president hadn't been caught on camera breaking the very rules she preached. But small towns have long memories and fast mouths. Someone, no one will ever admit who, leaked the footage. It hit Facebook first. People laughed. Then it spread to TikTok, where teenagers stitched it with barking sound effects and slow-motion replays of her tripping over the clipboard. By the time it hit the local newsletter under the headline, HOA Karen Mauled by Country Justice, Grace's name was everywhere. I didn't celebrate, didn't post about it. I just went back to my work, the way you do when peace returns after a storm. The gates stayed locked, the cameras stayed rolling, and Bear and Grizzle got extra treats in their bowls. But in the quiet moments, I thought about it. Not the bite, not the trial, but the way she'd walked onto my land like she owned it. The way she'd decided her title gave her more rights than my deed. People like that, they don't just disappear when you beat them once, and I knew one day Grace would test those boundaries again. Grace didn't vanish after the court loss. People like her never do. They linger, circling, looking for cracks to slip through. But she wasn't circling with power anymore. She was circling with a limp, both literal and social. The first time I saw her after the restraining order, it was from a distance. I was loading feed into the truck at Miller's Supply, and she was across the street, fumbling with her car keys. She caught sight of me and froze, not because she was scared of me, but because she was scared of what everyone else might think if she said something. In a small town, sometimes silence is louder than shouting. Word had gotten around. Fast. Neighbors who used to nod politely at her HOA updates were now ducking out of conversations. One guy I knew from church told me that at the last HOA meeting, she tried to open with community safety, but got interrupted by someone barking, actually barking, from the back row. The room had laughed. Grace had snapped. Even Frank, the guy who'd texted me when this all started, said he'd never seen her so off balance. She's losing her grip, man, he told me over a beer. Half the board's embarrassed. The other half's just waiting for her to mess up again so they can replace her. But the thing about Grace? She didn't believe in losing. She believed in regrouping. I could see it in the way she moved at the grocery store. How her eyes darted around the aisles like she was mapping something. She wasn't just avoiding me. She was thinking. plotting, trying to figure out a way to claw her reputation back from the jaws of public humiliation. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't fuel the fire. I didn't post about the video or comment. When people brought it up, I let the silence do its work, because I've learned something about people like Grace. The harder they try to fix the story, the worse they make it for themselves. And sure enough, she made it worse. It happened on a Saturday morning. Clear skies, a little breeze, the kind of day that makes farm work feel almost peaceful. I was tightening the fence line near the east pasture when I heard the low hum of amplified voices drifting across the fields. Grace had set up a microphone in the HOA's clubhouse courtyard. From my property, I could just make out the banner strung above her. Community Safety Awareness Day. Tables lined with pamphlets, coffee and paper cups, and a scattering of residents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She was trying to spin the trespassing into some kind of public service moment. "Sometimes," she said into the mic, her voice carrying over the breeze, "we have to take risks to protect the integrity of our neighborhoods, even if it means personal sacrifice." I could almost hear the eye rolls from here, she went on, weaving her own version of the story, how she'd discovered dangerous, aggressive animals on a property within the community buffer and narrowly escaped a severe mauling while bravely collecting evidence. But in a small crowd, it only takes one person to pull the thread out of a speech. From the back, a man's voice cut in. "Was the evidence on the clipboard you tripped over?" The laughter that followed wasn't polite. It was sharp, the kind that stings long after it fades. Grace tried to push through, raising her voice, talking over it. But then another voice piped up. "How's that restraining order treating you?" That one broke the crowd. People covered their mouths. Some didn't bother hiding their grins. Even a couple of board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by the ground. Grace's face flushed deep red. She wrapped the speech up in record time, yanked the mic cord out like it had burned her, and stormed back into the clubhouse. By that evening, the HOA group chat, which I was absolutely not a part of, but somehow still got screenshots from, was full of jokes, memes, and yes, slow-motion gifs of her fall from my security footage. The tide had turned, not just against Grace, but away from her. And that's the thing about losing your audience. Once they stop following you, can't lead them anywhere. The HOA board meeting was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, every one of them full. I wasn't a member, but that didn't stop Frank from texting me updates from the back row. Grace walked in late, a stack of files hugged to her chest like armor. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Normally, she'd be in her element here, head high, voice crisp, commanding the room like it was her courtroom. But tonight, she looked smaller. The agenda was short, but everyone knew the real reason they were here. Board leadership review. She tried to start strong, talking about budgets and landscaping contracts, but the room was ice. Every word she said fell flat. No nods, no murmurs of agreement, just the scrape of someone's pen on paper and the occasional cough. Then the vice president cleared his throat. "Grace, before we move forward, the board has received multiple complaints regarding conduct unbecoming of an HOA officer. We'll be holding a vote to determine whether you should continue in your position." Her head snapped up. "This is absurd," she said. "One incident does not define—" "Actually," someone from the back interrupted, "we've all seen the video. It defines plenty." The room shifted. Quiet laughter, the rustle of jackets. Grace's eyes darted around like she was looking for an ally, but no one met her gaze. The vote was fast. Hands raised, counted, written down. By the time they finished, the vice president didn't even have to say the number. Grace could see it in the air. She was out. Frank texted me, 11-1. The one was her. She gathered her files without a word, stood, and walked out. No gavel slam, no dramatic speech, just the soft sound of the door closing behind her. It wasn't victory I felt when Frank told me. It wasn't even relief. It was quieter than that. A stillness, like the air after a long, loud storm, but storms leave puddles, and sometimes they reflect things you'd rather not see. The weeks after Grace's removal were almost unnervingly quiet. No surprise visits at the gate, no photos taken over the fence, no HOA letters slipped under my door. Bear and Grizzle roamed the yard without stopping to bark at passing cars. The air smelled of hay and fresh rain again. Life slid back into its old rhythm. Morning chores, long days, quiet nights. But every so often I'd catch myself glancing toward the road, half expecting to see that purple blouse in the distance. She never came back. Not legally, anyway. The restraining order made sure of that. One evening, Frank stopped by with a six-pack. We sat on the porch, the dogs stretched out at our feet, watching the sun drop behind the tree line. "You know," he said, "you could have gone after her harder. Fines, lawsuits. You could have buried her." I took a sip of beer, felt the glass sweat against my palm. Maybe. But sometimes burying someone isn't justice. It's just revenge. And revenge, it never really fills you up. Frank nodded, though I'm not sure he agreed. I thought about my father then, how he used to say land is more than dirt. It's trust. The people who step on it without asking, they're not just breaking rules. They're breaking something. Deeper, Grace broke that, and she paid for it. Not with money, not with jail time, but with the one thing people like her can't afford to lose, the illusion of power. Now she was just Grace. No title, no clipboard. Just another name people whispered when they needed a cautionary tale. As the last light faded and the porch settled into shadow, I scratched Bear behind the ears and looked out at my fence line. The signs were still there, the gates still locked. Not because I was scared she'd come back, but because I'd learned something from all of this. Boundaries aren't just fences. They're a promise you make to yourself. That you'll stand where it matters, that you won't be moved just because someone else wants the ground under your feet, and that when the wrong person crosses the line, you'll be ready to meet them there.